Welcome to Humane Voices, the official podcast of the Humane Society of the United States. Carrie and Austin here again talking about the dangers of exotic pet ownership. Carrie, I feel like this topic is coming up in the news more and more, from roadside zoos to tigers roaming in suburban neighborhoods. It's like they're not listening to the podcast here. It just keeps coming up over and over again. What's happening?
Clearly, we got to build our audience here, Austin, because otherwise, everybody would be doing the right thing when they have the right information.
Exactly. And we are going to hear some great information here. Today, we'll hear the unfortunate latest story in the saga on this topic. And our guest on the show is Lisa Watney, senior strategist from our captive wildlife team here at the Humane Society of the United States, to give us an update. Thank you so much for sitting down to chat with us, Lisa. We are really glad that you're here.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, Lisa, and for all the audience that we're talking about in this topic of exotic pet ownership, in the most recent story that comes out of Oregon, a chimpanzee had attacked a 50-year-old woman, and she was rushed to the hospital with bites in her torso, in her arms, and her legs. And the chimpanzee, named Buck, was a family pet of 17 years, and reports are that the chimp attacked the owner's adult daughter. The police had arrived on the scene and unfortunately shot and killed the chimp at the request of the owner. So, Lisa, can we please break this down a little bit? I feel like there are many issues with this story, a lot of red flags. I'm not even sure where to start here.
The place to start is the fact that this unfortunate animal was purchased as a pet, as a baby 17 years ago. And that sealed his fate right then and there. Anybody could have predicted that this was not going to turn out well. Even if it hadn't ended with him being shot and killed, he was forced to live completely unnaturally. He basically was treated as a human child, and he had the run of their home. He ate at the table. He had the run of their property. And these are things that might, somebody might look at that and think, oh, what a wonderful life for this animal. He wasn't caged. But no, he was a chimpanzee, and he was denied the most important thing to chimpanzees, and that is the companionship of their own kind.
Yeah, I think Lisa, this issue is such an interesting one to me, because it's one of the things that we have to get into as an animal protection and animal welfare group, where we always have to think about, like, what is best for the animal, because, and there are these things that come up in our movement where I think there's this, what we're actually wrestling with is the complexities of how much people love animals, and how much the complexities of how they want to be close to them and they want to bond with them, and the ways in which sometimes that can be a bad thing for the animal. I mean, I remember when I was in college, there was this horrible pet store down the road from my college that had sugar gliders for sale, which are just, if people don't know what sugar gliders are, they're basically sort of flying squirrels, and they are possibly the most adorable animal you have ever seen. And they would keep them in this little sack, and the sugar gliders would just sort of fly randomly around the pet store. And I was just sort of smitten and was like, oh, I should have a sugar glider. And it wasn't until years later that I was like, oh no, I didn't get one, but I'm sure other people did.
Yeah, sugar gliders, unfortunately, are very popular pets, and it's completely inappropriate for the sugar gliders. And there are a lot of, as with all exotic animals kept as pets, there are many, it's usually a tragic ending for most of these animals, whether they're shot and killed like Buck, or they die of neglect, as many other species, or they're turned loose by owners who no longer want them, or they escape and are never found, and they don't make it in the wild.
Right. Yeah. And I would think that even the ones that don't have sort of dramatic, awful endings, are probably living lives that are less than ideal for them. There are probably, hundreds and thousands of animals who are kind of being kept in inappropriate situations where it never turns into a dramatic news incident, but they're living in a way that an animal would never choose if it had the option.
Yeah. Not only in a way they wouldn't choose, but many, many of them in truly miserable conditions. And there are numerous examples of these animals finally being found. discovered somehow, either because a neighbor sees it and reports it, or a person who has an animal becomes elderly and their family finally calls authorities to come in and remove a spider monkey that they've had for years. And these are animals who have lived, I can't tell you how many times we see monkeys living their lives in bird cages. Bird cages that aren't appropriate for birds, let alone
right. Yeah, like even birds living in bird cages isn't the best all the time. Yeah.
And so these are the lucky ones who are found after suffering for years. But every time that happens, I ask my coworker, and how many of them are out there who are never discovered?
Yeah, that we never even know about. Yeah.
So, Lisa, is it legal to buy these exotic animals in the first place?
Yes. Most in the US, you can get almost any species you want. There's some, that nobody's going to go out at this point and buy a pet orangutan or a pet gorilla or a pet rhino. Well, I shouldn't say that. Somebody could get a rhino, but so it's legal, and buck was legal, even though the state of Oregon passed a law about more than 10 years ago now that outlawed the private ownership of great apes. Because this family possessed buck at the time the law went into effect, they were grandfathered in, so they were allowed to keep him there, which is a shame for him. There were numerous attempts to convince the family to turn Buck over to a sanctuary. And if they had made the compassionate decision and done so, he would still be alive today.
Oh my gosh.
But it's all too easy to buy almost any exotic animal you want, especially primates. And the trade in primates is really thriving right now. Not so much chimpanzees, that's pretty rare. I think most people at this point have, especially after, I don't know if y'all remember the incident years ago where Charla Nash literally had her face torn off by a pet chimpanzee. I think maybe that got through to a lot of people. Many other primate species, the trade is thriving, and these animals are sent across the country by breeders at days or just 2 or 3 weeks of age. It's really, really tragic.
So most of them are bred as opposed to captive caught. That's so disturbing.
Yeah, the US quite a while ago outlawed importing primates for the pet trade. They still can be imported for medical research, but not for the pet trade. So they are bred. There are many breeders in the US, and they're sending many species of monkeys all over the country for the pet trade.
You mentioned that this business was thriving. I know that we've been working on this issue for a long time, but do you have any inclination as to why this is such a thriving thing? Is it because I remember the last time that we were on, we were talking about the little Netflix show called Tiger King, and how the issue of roadside zoos and these red flags when it comes to exotic pet ownership came up originally. And now with, COVID-19 happening and a lot of people are at home, I mean, do you have they brought an impact on this issue to a head? What have you been seeing?
I think for big cats, yes. I think that maybe even before Tiger King, but certainly since, I think most people who went to a roadside zoo and held a tiger cub and had their photo taken with it still had enough sense to know that, a tiger's not an appropriate pet for the average family. But these same places are now turning hugely to allowing people to pet and hold and play with many species of monkeys, sloths, otters, and most people aren't making the connection that they're obviously much smaller and not as strong as tigers, or they're not predators, and they're just not making that same connection. Especially with the real tiny little marmosets and tamarins, They call them finger monkeys.
Oh
And
God, it's like pocket pets, like
yeah,
pocket pets,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
and
Oh my God.
the breeders advertise them with pictures of this tiny, I mean, these monkeys weigh ounces, you know, wrapped around somebody's finger. They're adorable. They might even be more adorable than sugar gliders, Carrie.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking like the way they sell, like what they call teacup pigs.
Yes.
That's not a teacup pig. It's going to get bigger, but these sort of like highlighting the tininess and the adorableness of these animals. It's almost like you wish you could make these animals bigger so they wouldn't be prone to these bad marketing strategies.
Yeah, bigger or ugly or
Yeah,
something.
right. That should be our new campaign. Make the animals ugly.
Make them ugly. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so it's and people, like with any wild animal, these people, even though they might be a tiny marmoset or even a capuchin sized monkey, they have incredible strength. They're much stronger than humans, most primates, and they have their wild instincts and really specialized needs that people simply cannot meet. And so again, these animals go into these homes and their people dress them in little clothes and carry them around in their purse. It's misery for the animals.
Yeah. Lisa, I mean, I've been in the field a while now, and it seems to me like one of the challenges that seems to come up around this issue is that, because you were talking about how this is largely legal. What I've seemed to notice, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is it seems like these things sort of stay legal until some horrible incident happens, and then there's kind of this rush to try to pass a law based only on that incident, when if we had kind of considered earlier the needs of the animal, we wouldn't be sort of like doing these reactive laws only when a tragedy happens. We would be sort of prioritizing the needs of the animal from the start and avoiding these things that create these sort of reactive crises.
Yeah, no, I agree. And in an ideal world, that's how it would be. Unfortunately, when first there have been many attempts to pass laws after really horrific incidents that still go nowhere because legislators prioritize the rights of the people over the needs of the animal, certainly, or even the safety of the people who live around the people who own these animals, which is quite astounding. But I agree with you completely. It would be, we're seeing a decline in tiger cub petting and lion cub petting, which is fantastic.
That's good. Yeah.
But we're seeing a huge spike in these programs that offer in public interaction with primates and sloths and otters. And what a thrill it would be to get ahead of this problem and pass laws now that prohibit that. But it's like pulling teeth.
Yeah, I think especially on this podcast, one of the greatest tools that we can have for the audience is an educational aspect in what to look out for in these types of things. So if you could help us out, can you define what a roadside zoo is for us? Maybe red flags that we can look out for when we're taking a road trip or seeing these animals?
Especially right since everybody's starting to think about traveling again and maybe trying to have these little summer vacations at this point. I mean, I think this comes up a lot where people are traveling and they see something that they're like, oh, I love animals, I'll go to this animal exhibit, and they don't know that you're supporting something that actually isn't something that someone who loves animals should really be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we loosely consider a roadside zoo to be any facility that is not accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums or the APA. And so frankly, most exhibits or facilities you run into as you're driving around the country with your family it's going to be a roadside zoo, more likely than not. But if you go into one of these places, one thing that you immediately know something's wrong, if they offer public interaction with any, if they allow you to, and they usually want to charge you extra for it, to pet and play with monkeys, bobcats, sloths, otters, ferrets, anything you can think of. They're offering programs like that. That's a huge red flag. And that is not a facility that's operating in the best interest of the animals. Even if they call themselves a sanctuary or a rescue or a refuge, a lot of them use these words in their names to kind of give the public a sense of ease about what they're doing. And they'll tell people that the animals were rescued. If somebody thinks enough to ask, well, you know, this is a baby, why isn't it with his mom? There's always an excuse given. The mom rejected them. That's not what happens when these animals being used for these programs are being pulled away from their mothers within days of birth, usually, so that they can be handled. It's a cruel, cruel practice from beginning to end.
Lisa, wasn't there a thing just recently there was a case with an otter who was kind of being mishandled at one of these type places? I know I saw the footage, and it's really upsetting to watch, because it, like, the sort of cognitive dissonance that happened for me when I'm watching this is kind of like you're looking at what is sort of like a kind of small scale budget Disney World type of setting, and these families sitting around like all happy and excited, and then this woman brings out this otter who is clearly just so distressed. Like, the otter is screaming like the entire time when he's being offered to families for touching and handling, and it's so upsetting.
Yeah, that was at Tiger Safari in Tuttle, Oklahoma. It's a place that we did an undercover investigation at a number of years ago when they used tiger cubs for petting. And we revealed the horrific abuse involved with that. And they no longer use tiger cubs, probably partly because of our investigation and the bad PR they receive for that. But they do use many other animals, including that otter. And I agree, that footage was so disturbing. You could hear that otter screaming before he was even brought into the room. The baby only about 6 months old. And what was equally disturbing to me, I watched that video so many times, and a couple of times I didn't look at him, I looked at the people who were there for that experience, and only one of them seemed to get it. There was one woman with a very concerned look on her face, and the rest were smiling and laughing and petting him, and all the while the handler was making excuses going on, you know, trying to alleviate any concerns people may have had. It's difficult for me to understand how somebody experiences something like that and didn't immediately see this is bad.
So interesting. You know, like some of that, I think that I completely agree. And yet I do think that, we have a sort of state of our country and maybe generally society where people are so disconnected from the natural world that maybe they just don't recognize an animal in distress immediately, or think, hey, it's screaming the way a little toddler might scream, that sort of anthropomorphism where it's like, oh, it's just screaming because it's, excited, and it's like to us, we look at it and you're just like, that animal is terrified.
Yeah, I agree. And the owner was right there in the room, didn't step in to stop it, because of course all these people had paid an additional fee to participate in this, what he calls a VIP experience. And and when the otter was then, taken away and put back in a room, they don't even have an otter exhibit at this Tiger Safari. So he doesn't even have relief in between these handlings. Someplace good to go. So yeah, it's miserable for these animals, no doubt.
They should change the VIP logo to a VTO, a very traumatized otter event.
I love it. Yeah.
Maybe that would be sort of truth in advertising.
Yes, absolutely.
Required stamp there. Yeah. So Lisa, we've spoken about otters, chimpanzees, tigers. Is there a species in your experience that is suffering the most from the pet trade?
Oh, I think no doubt that would be reptiles and birds, just because of sheer numbers and the circumstances that these animals are kept in, not only for reptiles, but the people who breed and sell them. They keep them, if you've ever seen photos, it's absolutely horrific. Huge rooms of literally like plastic shoe boxes stacked on top of each other. These animals have no natural atmosphere. They cannot even stretch out to their full size, most of them. They're shipped around the country, and the death rate of reptiles is staggering. The saddest thing about the reptile trade is how little compassion or empathy people have in general for reptiles. As we all know, people scream in fear of, about snakes, and most reptiles, they get so little consideration. And the people who buy them they don't have a clue about the special needs of these animals. Many of them die in shipment. Many of them die shortly after they go into their homes. Many of them are released to the wild when the novelty wears off. I don't think
which is horrifying.
Anybody suffers more than reptiles.
So Lisa, can you talk, I mean, the reptile thing is so interesting because it's like when I think about, exotic pets being released in the wild, I think probably that's mostly a thing because a pet or an animal who has been treated as a pet is no longer prepared to cope in the wild. But, we have a situation, like what's happened in Florida with the pythons there, where it's almost the exact opposite, where it's come, like the python copes actually quite well, copes to the point where it starts eating, native species and actually, yeah.
Yeah, I think with reptiles, they're released by people who tire of them or whatever, because they do, if they're in an appropriate climate, they think they can thrive. Most of them can't, but the pythons have certainly been an exception to that, to the detriment of the native wildlife in the Everglades. But I think also, even with the people who get these animals as pets, there's a real disconnect about turning a reptile loose. Somebody who would never turn their dog loose to try to make it on their own. They don't have that same empathy for the reptiles. Most of them die because they can't survive the weather in most parts of the country, although that may be changing. But yeah, it's so I think most of them die and we never even know about them. I in Seattle, Washington, was walking my dog last year, and we found in the park, dead exotic lizard of some kind, certainly not anything that's native here. So no doubt an escaped or released pet, probably purchased at, a major pet chain, and there he is now, dead in the park.
God, it's so sad.
Yeah.
Lisa, what we've heard now, a lot of these stories about the serious dangers and issues, both to the public, but also to the animal themselves, about exotic pet ownership. What can the public do to help these animals and to curb the private ownership issue?
Well, obviously, don't buy them. Don't get any wild or exotic animal as a pet is not appropriate, not good for the animal, ultimately is not going to be good for the pet owner. And get in touch with your state directors, the HSUS state director for your state, to see if we are focusing on legislation pertaining to exotic animals in your state, because we are in a number of states. And so the more support we have from constituents of the legislators who are dealing with these issues, the better. Legislators need to know that people care about this issue, and that they're not only concerned about the public safety aspect of it, but they're concerned about the animal welfare aspect of it too. And that's critical. We have, various things being considered at state levels, city, county, little townships. There are really some great things going on. And the more public support we have for those, the greater chances of success.
Lisa, before we wrap up today, are there any other final, as more people are traveling throughout the summer, are there any other pieces of advice or information that you'd like to leave with our audience? Absolutely.
I would say, please stay away from the roadside zoos. As appealing as they may seem, they're not. The ones that offer the public contact experiences, as long as people pay to play, as we say, the zoos are going to continue these programs and the animals suffer. Even the ones who don't have those programs, the animals are suffering. They're in woefully substandard conditions. What goes on behind the scenes at many of these places would make your hair curl. If you pay to go into these places, you're supporting animal cruelty. Stay away. There are many, many other fun and exciting things to do with your family that involve animals without hurting them.
That includes swim with the dolphin exhibits, right?
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely.
We could go on a whole other thing there, but it definitely includes swim with the dolphins. Don't swim with the dolphins. Not a good idea. Not nice for the dolphins.
No, the dolphins always look like they're smiling, and that's to their detriment. They are not enjoying it. And there have been plenty of injuries caused by dolphins to people at these programs. You never hear about those because they're not required to be reported. They happen. Wow. The dolphins aren't happy.
So Lisa mentioned at the local and state level, there are pieces of legislation that you can reach out to your local legislator about. There is also federal legislation that you as a constituent can work to help these animals that are in need. Two of the most prevalent right now is the Captive Primate Safety Act and the Big Cat Public Safety Act. Those are two laws that are in federal legislation right now, so please call your legislator if you want to create that change. All right. Well, Lisa, thank you again for sitting down to chat with us. It's always a pleasure. Lisa Watney, Senior Strategist from our captive wildlife team at the Humane Society of the United States. Again, Lisa, it was a pleasure. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
Have a good summer, everyone.
Yeah.
Don't go to zoos.
See you next time on Humane Voices.